Greetings, and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me online at sorcerersguild.com, as well as on Facebook at the Sorcerers Guild. Now, before we begin today's episode, I would like to apologize for the lack of an actual episode this weekend. I know that I did promise one on Sunday after my musical interlude, but my life got quite busy, and I wasn't able to produce that for you. So, because it's Tuesday, we are now going to be doing the next episode in the Anarchies Last Stand, which we'll be doing every Tuesday until the book is complete. We will begin the novella today, and remember, the novella is attached to the two short stories that came before it, and the second of those stories will be, as well as the novella, will also pick up again in Volume 2 of the series. Okay, so I will have an episode later this week, if not this weekend. Oh, let me rephrase that. Okay, I will possibly have an early episode this week, but at the very least, I will have an episode this weekend. The next episode is going to be on invocation and possession, and a discussion on what I define as a demon. Okay, but that is another episode. Today we are going to begin reading the novella, which is entitled The Fayrune Saga. There will be several portions in here where we skip from one scene to the next, so I will just say next scene when that comes up. I'm going to read for about 20-25 minutes of the story, so a few chapters, and that will be it until next week. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the story. And as I said, it's entitled The Fayrune Saga. The subtitle is A Trail of Footprints. Azrium, the Will-Taker's purple eyes, gazed out the western window of his black tower, watching the sun set against the light lavender waves of the sacred ocean. The bright reds and subtle bluish greens of the sunset were marred by angry slashes of sickly gray, produced when rays of light from the sun encountered the questing tentacles of the inky, black, necromantic sludge that had made its way free from the dark harbor in his city of Murkport. Tonight, even the sight of his creation, making its power known over the sunset, did not please him. Most evenings, he would sit and watch as the dark tendrils of undead slime slithered its way on its journey to seek out the living creatures of the sea, and drain their essence to feed his undead creations. Tonight, the rhythmic lapping of the waves that crossed the rotting sludge on its dark missions did not comfort him. Somehow, the movement of the waves seemed almost ominous, as if the ocean's waters were fighting back against the undead sludge. His gaze followed the waves westwards, out towards the sea. Why did he think of the slave girl now? The strange beast child he had purchased earlier that week. Completely untamable, he thought to himself. He had been told from the slave driver that she had come from lands far to the west. He had paid very little for the creature. He felt that was the best way to think of the primitive thing. He bought the creature out of curiosity, even tried to communicate with it, and though it seemed to understand every word he spoke, it didn't seem capable of speech in any known language. Every time he came near the cage in which she was housed, she would scratch and bite. It appeared to be a teenage girl, with teeth like a dog. Her ears were pointed like the elves of ancient legends. Green eyes appeared intelligent, but she moved like a beast. Two of her toes even seemed to have retractable talons, like a hunting cat, but only on one foot. A hybrid, perhaps, between a humanoid species and some sort of sapient monster, perhaps, Azrium pondered. Of the two, her actions resembled more than that of the dog. She would snarl and bark. She even howled like a wolf when he finally walked away. Utterly useless, but an interesting specimen for his zoo, he had left Azol with instructions to send her there in the morning. Azrium's pale purple eyes once again gazed westwards, out into the sacred ocean. He felt as if the setting sun were looking back at him unkindly. End scene. The tracks ended at the beach. If Petra had still been alive, he would have gotten there sooner, Coda thought to himself. She had always been a better tracker than him. No use dwelling on that now, Coda chided himself. A Fayrune cub had been taken, a cub from Coda's own coven. The girl was barely 14 cycles, a mere cub. Coda had been tracking the girl for 2 days when her trail was joined by the flat-tipped, hard-heeled boots of seven human pairs of hobnailed boots. The 7 pairs of boots joined the cubs in a small copse of trees near the edge of the beach, where a hastily constructed mat of leaves and a small cooking fire suggested the cub had bedded down for the night. The tracks showed boots, heels braced in deep, taking a wide stance, a common tactic amongst human fighters. The cub's tracks showed bare feet. The 2 talons on her right foot extended, leaving long gouges in the sand when she had spun back and forth between the other 7 tracks. Red dotted the sand in several places, and even Coda's nose could smell the irony scent of human's blood in the air. The cub had fought hard, but in the end, the 7 pairs of hobnailed human boots led back down to the beach, and the cub's tracks disappeared. Following the tracks of the human's boots, Coda found 2 long indents that trailed through the beach sand, the tracks of a small, seafaring human rowboat being dragged back into the ocean waves, most likely to a larger ship waiting out in deeper water. Coda stared out, crossed the waves, and waited for the cub's return for 2 days before he left. By now, he had been traveling for another 3. His home coven was only 2 days' walk from where the child had been abducted, but it would be another day before he reached his destination. The tracks left by the 7 boots and the style of the boat in which they had traveled was clearly human, but was more closely related to the older style of men. For 7 generations, the Fayrune hordes and the human races of Meadow Valley had lived in relative harmony. This had a profound effect on both cultures. Most importantly, for the moment, the humans of Meadow Valley had ceased to wear the hobnailed iron-shod boots they had previously worn, in favor of the boots made with the harder yet more flexible, fine-pressed bone leather composite sole boots that the Fayrunes favored. Their boats also had been affected by Fayrune design and left a very different and less deep trail when dragged through the sand of the beach. No, these were the tracks from a race of men that had not yet encountered the Fayrune horde. And that meant those tracks had come from somewhere very, very far away. Coda had not headed home because he knew the answers to his questions were not hidden there. The only way he knew of to discover where the girl had been taken lay another day's walk to the south, and Coda did not wish to go. Quick Fingers. That's what they had called the girl, being as she had not yet earned a name of her own. The girl was not Coda's offspring, rather the offspring of his coven mates, Carrie and Rajil. In a Fayrune coven, though, this makes little difference. All love is shared. It was simply a matter of chance that Coda himself had not sired the cub. A Fayrune child from Coda's coven was missing, and Coda was determined to find her, or, if she had been killed, rain down the fury of the horde upon those who had harmed her. And so to the south he walked, alone. End scene. Tonight, the pungent white smoke that lazily curled itself about in Jeshua Wooderson's study held little comfort. Tonight, his pipe held no sanctuary. A gray sludge tainted his usually pleasant musings. Old gnarled fingers grasped the dark wood stem and marble stone of the wizard's long pipe. His breath drew in deeply, and he thought to himself, perhaps one more long puff and the herbal smoke would purify the solemn grayness and bring back the dancing maelstrom of light and swirling colors that usually accompanied his idle thoughts. He had already waited too long. He was sure of it. The small gray speck had been growing for years while he sat idle. The gray wrongness had grown huge. The ancient wizard's eyes gazed lazily to the east. Still time, he thought, his old wrinkled eyelids closing over his odd opal-colored eyes. Still time, he said as his head nodded deep into his long white beard. Still time. he mumbled one last time as he finally gave way to sleep. His dreams were tinged with undead gray sludge in the echoes of a ticking clock. End scene. The tower was not so much silver as it was iridescent, surrounded by 7 circles forming a spiral leading outwards from the tower. The 7 concentric circles were formed from an ancient hedge with long red leaves. The long red leaves of the hedge seemed harmless enough. When dealing with Jeshua Wittershins, that was no guarantee of their nature. Coda couldn't help but think of Petra now, so close to the tower where so many of their adventures had begun. The time of mourning had come and gone, Coda chided himself. To concentrate now. Long ago, the mad old wizard had grown wary of disturbances in his tower sanctuary, so he had constructed a new tower on an isolated stretch of the Minagichi River. As soon as the tower's location had been discovered, however, Jeshua Wittershins had a constant stream of challengers, would-be apprentices, and people seeking favors for a total of 2 or 3 every couple years. To avoid the constant disturbances, Jeshua Wittershins had grown the hedge. The hedge was less of a plant and more of a living spell, attached to the mad, often inebriated, senile old wizard's constantly changing whims. At the moment, the hedge row lay open, though, and the long red leaves seemed wilted and slightly lethargic, and just a shade away from their usual lustrous red. Coda had been here many times, never before without Petra. She could read the mood of the leaves. Without her, Coda had no idea if the hedge was safe. Going to have to take my chances, Coda said out loud to himself, and stepped into the hedge. Someone has entered the garden. Jeshua Wittershin's wizened old eyes struggled to open. The creature that sat before him looked like and was primarily composed of green pond scum and liquid gold. He called the creature Hentoad, though it bore much less resemblance to a hen than it did a toad. Jeshua Wittershins opened his eyes fully and waved his hand, dispersing the strange creature back to its watery home in the nether reaches of the tower, and walked towards the window. There was indeed someone entering the hedge, a Fayrune warrior by the looks of it. Jeshua Wittershin pinched his forefinger and thumb together and gazed into the circle created by his hand. This face was familiar, but something was missing. Some key detail. A trick? He asked himself aloud. Not likely. There's no spell associated with the figure or the hedge. Or the hedge would have reacted to its presence, he answered himself, also out loud. The face was familiar. Long brown hair and the pointed ears and teeth of the Fayrune, the common yellow eyes of his people. Coda's the Fayrune's name is Coda, Joshua thought. Yes. I have sent that boy on many errands throughout the years. But if this is Coda, where is Petra? The old wizard wondered to himself. Just then he remembered he had heard rumors. Best not to bring up that subject, the old wizard thought to himself. If any of those rumors are true, the lad must be crushed. The old wizard dropped the spell and closed his hand. Jeshua Wittershin wondered idly what brought the lad to his tower as he struck a small wooden handheld striker against an ornate brass gong anchored on his desk, and a slimy, golden-hued creature appeared. Hentoad, the person who entered the garden is known to us. Calm the hedge, and I will prepare myself for his arrival. The old wizard drew a long, multicolored cloth from his closet and began wrapping it around his body as a robe. The fabric was enchanted so that the colors reflected the background energy of the planet. As he arranged the material, Jeshua Wittershin noticed the gray stain had grown larger. End scene. Coda walked the 7 spiraled rows of the hedge, eyeing the blood-red leaves uneasily. Petra was no longer with him to warn him if the hedge's mood suddenly changed. So far, the hedge seemed calm. But he had never before come here unannounced, and even then, a few times, there had been problems. Coda's pointed Fayrune ears twitched at the sound of every hedge leaf that brushed in the faint southerly wind, skittering odd dried leaves and revealing small crawling creatures. Coda's nose twitched, trying to catch the scent of the hedge, Strong though his nose was compared to most humanoid species, he could not smell emotion, unlike Petra. Finally, Coda circled around the seven spiraled rows of the hedge and strode towards the door. Up close, the tower was hard to look at. A bright, silvery, iridescent assault to the eyes, and an extreme myriad of colors, of which the mortal mind was never intended to conceive. Coda had never been able to grow accustomed to the sudden assault on his senses, and instead focused his eyes on the door, which was simply black and white at the same time, but never gray. When he knocked on the door, he was greeted by another strange sight, which he had never been able to grow accustomed to. The liquid gold and green slimy lump that was Hentoad. "What do you want now?" the golden green slime croaked in its gravelly, wet voice. "Hentoad, it's nice to see you again as well," Coda replied, trying not to breathe. The smell of the strange creature was another assault on the senses, which Coda had never quite gotten used to. "I suppose you'll want to be seeing him then," Hentoad said. "No one ever comes to see me." "If you joined the circus, people would stand in line every day just to catch a glimpse of you," Coda replied. A broad smile crept across Hentoad's wide frog-like mouth. "I just bet they would. I could see humans and elves, maybe even a dwarf. They never come to the tower, dwarfs. Alls I ever see are Fayrunes and wizards. Wizards come in all kinds of races, but still all the same, all magic and boring spells and whatnot. The only other people I see are all adventurers, scholars, and witch doctors. I want to meet something different, like a farmer or a blacksmith, maybe a tailor, something normal and interesting like that." Hentoad's rant was cut short as Jeshua Wittershins appeared at the top of the stairs. "Hey, Jeshua!" the lump of slime and liquid gold yelled excitedly as he noticed Jeshua Wittershins' arrival at the top of the stairs. "Coda says I should join the circus, and then all kinds of interesting normal people would come see me." Jeshua Wittershins shook his head slightly, the corners of his wrinkled mouth edging towards a grimace as he walked down the stairs. "You know full well that it will be at least another 600 years before you are well formed enough to leave the tower grounds unattended. Without me following behind you, casting maintenance spells on you every couple hours, you would disperse into your base variables before you even made it 100 yards from the tower grounds. And then what would you be? Just a pile of pond algae, a heavy stack of gold, and a few bits and pieces of toad bones and eggshells." Hentoad turned away disappointedly, a small fart bubbling out of the liquid gold and slime of his backside just before he disappeared from the room, teleporting himself back to his watery lair underneath the tower. Jeshua Witterson's wrinkled old face turned from a slight grimace to a large smile as he turned towards the Fayrune. "Ah, Coda, it's good to see you, even if it is unannounced. I have a thing I need someone to look into, perhaps. You and... But Coda, my boy, where is your dog?" End scene. It had been 6 months since Petra's death. Perhaps her finally growing old had been harder. Coda and the dog had been together for 23 cycles, an admittedly long lifespan for a dog, even though Fayrune hounds were known for their exceptional lifespans, as well as high intelligence and hunting prowess. Petra had been Coda's best friend and closest ally since he was 10 cycles, and the pup had crawled out of her mother's den and began following the boy, then known as Odd, about his home coven. He had named her Petra because her fur was the color of dull red sandstone, with black lines tracing through it. Petra's light brindle coloration not only gave her a unique look, but also provided her with a camouflage coat which allowed her to sneak through the underbrush unseen and slowly herd game animals towards Coda's waiting crossbow, and then flushing the animals directly into his line of fire. On Coda's 15th cycle, he chose to attend the guild gathering, not to join a guild and seek his name through training in a craft or skill, but to declare his intention to go guildless. He had come to this decision 2 years prior while hunting rabbits with Petra. He decided this not because he lacked any skills or talents, nor did he resent the responsibilities that come with membership in a guild. There was a reason that his home coven had chosen to call him Odd. He never quite fit. Coda wasn't an outcast. He had been treated quite well in his home coven, and fared well amongst the other cubs. In fact, Coda had been the first of the 7 cubs in his litter for his baby fur to begin falling out at the young age of 12. Perhaps Koda had too many interests to choose one guild. He wanted to hunt, and he wanted to sell ships, and he wanted to go on adventures, and paint, and learn to make gidge, and just do everything he could before having to go through the long cycle known as death and be reborn. He felt as if he had maybe already lived all those lives. Koda wanted to try something different. So on the year of his 15th cycle, the child known as Odd, still a bit of fur left on his chest, went to the guild gathering and stood for his first time before a council and announced his intention to become guildless. Becoming guildless was not a shameful act, only rare. In fact, several heroes of the Horde had been guildless and had lived lives that furthered the glory of the Horde. Few who knew him were surprised by his decision, and so it was that Odd and Petra went forth into the world and lived a life that would further the glory of the Horde, eventually earning him the name Koda. A word in one of the Fayrune's many ancient tongues, a word that means dog, in honor of the pivotal role which Petra played in Koda's many acts of bravery and valor in the name of the Horde. Koda owed both his name and his reputation to Petra, so when the dog grew old, Koda felt that she deserved to be allowed to live out her waning years in comfort. So less than a cycle ago, Koda had returned to the Horde and joined a home coven near where he and Petra had been born. It took 2 months before Petra decided that Koda was staying put and began wandering off in search of adventure on her own. In the end, it was a Skrillex that had taken Petra from Koda. The large, six-legged herbivore would not have been a match for Petra in her prime, despite the large pincers on its first 2 legs and the large mandibles. But Petra had grown old. Koda came across the scene as both the six-legged beast and Petra lay dying in each other's death embrace. 2 of the Skrillex' massive pincers half closed through Petra's torso, her ivory-white teeth filling with ruby-red blood as she struggled with her last breath to close her teeth around the Skrillex' massive throat. Koda killed the Skrillex quickly, but Petra's wounds were too deep, and in those last few moments, Koda's best friend died in his arms, licking his face one last time as she passed away. Koda had always known that Petra would die before him. He had been prepared for her death, but not like this. Koda could not forgive himself for allowing the dog to wander off on her own. He felt as if he had betrayed his dog. He should have been there. He never should have tried to settle down. He felt responsible for Petra's death. End scene. Koda and Jeshel Wittershins sat on the wizard's study, passing back and forth a long wooden pipe with a white marble bowl. Koda was explaining what had brought him to the tower. The reason that I decided to come here was the tracks that I found. The humans that took the child used primitive pre-Horde technology, and there were even signs they still used melted stone. Humans haven't used iron in over 50 cycles. Whoever took Quick Fingers was from very, very far away. How would I find such a child? Jeshel Wittershins demanded. He already knew where the Fayrune child had gone. His dreams had been troubled last night, again, by dreams of an undead grey sludge, as they had been for many nights in the last several years, each one growing more and more insistent. Last night, he had dreamed of a young Fayrune female who had been drawn into the grey sludge and locked in a cage, and he knew where the grey sludge was. Perhaps this was his key to unlock a chest filled with Fayrune warriors to launch against the dark grey sludge that had been tainting his usually bright psychedelic lights. Jeshel Wittershins began wiggling his left pinky in a counterclockwise direction. Perhaps a minor agitation spell was in order. You don't speak to a child, you old crook, nor to someone not familiar with your habits. You haven't asked for any details on the child, a lock of her hair. You haven't even asked me closely about the tracks I found and their primitive pre-Horde origin. You love a goodish who's to cast a spell, and you have never balked in aiding the Fayrune before, especially to save a child. Why do you pretend to be weak now, when I asked you for help? Did Koda and his brethren not clear the northern pass when the enemies of the friends of Jeshel Wittershins blocked his passage? Has not the Fayrune horde and Jeshel Wittershins lived in cooperative harmony for the last 2,000 cycles? Since you first appeared amongst our people, claiming to be a friend of the horde, and yet you balk at such a simple request? Coda began to rise from his seat, then slowly sat himself back down when his sharp yellow eyes noted the subtle motions of Jeshel Wittershin's left pinky, which the old wizard was attempting to hide from his vision. Did you think my dog smelling your magic? Did you think without my dog smelling your magic, my eyes would not see your pinky moving? Coda said, his jaw set left slightly open after he spoke to leave sharp white teeth exposed. Even aware of the spell, Coda could not resist its pull. He could only work to control its momentum. Now it was directed at Jeshel Wittershins for having cast the spell. Suddenly, his anger ceased, but not completely. My apologies, the sly old wizard said. I wouldn't have resorted to such a... My apologies, the sly old wizard said. I wouldn't have resorted to such a desperate attempt of manipulation on a member of the Fayrune horde, but these are desperate times. A great evil has grown up in the West, and I intended to make you so angry at me that you would demand what information I have and charge off with a score of Fayrune warriors to fight this evil scourge when you found it. But now, perhaps I have another way. A price, if you will. I can tell you where the girl is gone. She was swallowed up by a great evil that lies on the eastern shore of the Sacred Ocean. I have reason to believe she is still alive. But if I tell you, you must call council for war if you wish to receive the child. If you wish to retrieve the child, there is no other way. You still haven't mentioned your price, Coda said, his sharp yellow eyes appraising the strange wizard through half-narrowed lids. Ah, yes, a price. I did call it that, didn't I? This chaotic old brain of mine. Jeshel Wittershin said, tapping the empty bowl of his long wooden pipe into a small white bowl carved from the skull of some long-dead monster. I want you to take me with you. And when we get there, fulfill the quest that I ask of you. In exchange, I personally will see to the safety of the Fayrune child. What sort of quest? The Gildas Fayrune demanded. I don't know that. I won't know that until we get there, the old wizard replied. He had a pretty good idea what he would need the resourceful Gildas Fayrune to do. In fact, he had a new spell in mind he wanted to try for at least one of the missions he would send the creature on before the war was over. The Fayrune needed a new enemy. Things had grown dull. The Foe-Biter Wars had ended when Coda was still a child. When he was earning his name, at least many of the human cities had been at war, and evil wizards roamed the lands, thanks to Coda, Petra, and many others like them. This was no more. Most of the human cities within the known lands were now at peace, and not hiring Fayrune mercenaries, nor committing acts that would anger the horde, such as owning slaves or over-harvesting the fields, waters, or forest. There were few ways a young Fayrune of any of the war or adventure-based guilds to earn a name, outside of the intercoven sports wars, but some of those once sport-like rivalries were beginning to almost take on a sense of real anger from one coven to another. It would be a simple matter to call the guilds to war. Coda was well known to many figures was a well-known figure to many guilds. Coda was a well-known figure to many guilds, and had worked alongside both the Dastard and Warriors guilds as a mercenary in many human wars. The young had need of naming and training. The guilds always had a need of glory. He would go to the City of Trees and spread this message of war, to rescue a Fayrune cub who had been taken by an unknown race of humans from far to the west, and the wrath of the Fayrune horde would follow. With this great quest, Coda felt as well. With this great quest, starting to slip up here. With this great quest, Coda felt as well he would finally cement his name as hero of the horde. He quickly accepted Jeshel Wittershin's proposal. End scene. Quickfingers had lost track of time. The blank iron walls gave her no indication of the movement of time, except when the iron slat and the top screeched open violently and food and water were shoved through the iron portal before another lower-pitched screech dragged the latch back into place to cover the small rusted hole that was Quickfinger's only connection to the outside world. Even the meat tasted of captivity, some kind of domesticated animal, like many of the humans kept near her home. She could almost taste the animal's despair in the bloody, undercooked meat. Something about it tasted different today. Was it drugged? She ate it anyway. How often did they feed her here? Once a day? Twice a day? Once every couple of days? Judging from the slow procession of her ribs to the top of her skin, the latter seemed the most likely. She needed to keep track of days, to count hours. Keep your mind organized, she repeated to herself out loud. Keep your mind organized, she repeated to herself out loud for perhaps the 1000th time. Fayrune were wild creatures, the end result of when 23 beasts of the elder races overcame the sting of mortal's fear to seek out knowledge of the phenomena known as love. For a short period of time, less than 500 years, 23 wild elders resided on the surface of Terra, seeking not conquest, but an understanding of the phenomena that required gentle kindness. From the elder race's offspring, mixed with Fey, Fayrune, human, etc., the original 23 tribes of the Fayrune horde were born. Locked in her cage, Quickfingers could feel the more vicious side of her beast-like nature begin to rise. Count hours. Write sonnets. Occupy your mind. Do not give in to the ravenous beast. Do not become angry! The last becoming a howl as it escaped the young Fayrune's feral lips. Quickfinger's eyes were green and bright, the type of green that seemed to glow at night. Her hands were long, her fingers slender and dexterous, the quick fingers being what gave her her moniker. Though she was only 14 cycles, she had been convinced that the Dastard Guild would take her early, even though she didn't remember it yet. She was surely the reincarnation of the Emerald Fox. After all, look at the color of her eyes, the same deep green of legend, and her hands were fast. She could throw knives or set snares quicker than any adult in her coven. Still, when the Dastard Guilds had told her to try again in a few cycles, she had stormed out. She hadn't really been running away. She just wanted a few days to think, to be alone in the woods, with no one to remind her that she was only 14. Her own carelessness, to be caught by primitive humans while sleeping next to a glowing fire, served as proof enough to remind her of her young and inexperienced age. She had fared better with her rage on the journey, as the slave trader who had brought her to this fate had kept her drugged to prevent her from escaping. They had had the added benefit of aiding her to keep the beast in check. Now in here, with only 4 blank walls of rusty melted stone to occupy her, the beast could only hold its tongue for so long. End that scene, and we cut to Azul. Azul proudly pulled his bulbous legs forward through the mound of pale white flesh that had congealed itself around his legs and upper thighs, as he strode down the dank dungeon corridor of his domain. He was responsible for this pain, all this misery, and weeping that oozed through the walls, and was Azul's doing, not Azrium. No, Azul. This was Azul's pain. He made them weep. Azrium ruled the tower, but everyone in Azul's dungeon knew who ruled underneath that tower, and someday he would rule above. It is Azul who sews together the precious corpses. He who chooses from the city's dead who and what to sew back together. He, Azul, who draws down the lightning and makes the sown beasts rise. Azul's thoughts were interrupted as he came to the door which held the girl creature. Azrium had sent word over a week ago to send the creature to his open-air zoo to be on display. Azul had enjoyed her howls too much to let her leave so soon. Too bad her teeth and claws had been forbidden from being removed, or any other things that might have marred the creature's appearance, Azul thought to himself. He had heard it bark and growl. He wanted to know if the bitch could also yipe and whimper. Alas, Azrium was rumored to be going down to the zoo tomorrow to see this very creature from a more idle viewpoint. If the creature were not there, and Azrium came into the dungeon to investigate, he might discover other things that would anger him much more than a disfigured beast child. Azel took a short piece of black-tinted wax from his pocket and placed a small Z on the door, representing the creature inside should be taken to the zoo. The two four-armed giant Octali guards that followed his orders could not read, but they had been trained to recognize the symbol and its meaning. He just hoped the lumbering creatures had remembered to drug the she-bitch. Or else, when they opened that door, he would likely be sewing up 3 new precious corpses for Azrium's undead army. Okay, and we're going to end there. So that'll be it for this episode. We will finish this portion of the Fayrune Saga next time, I believe, since it's going to be about the same length of read to finish it, I think. So we should finish that next time, and then we will begin the poetry. Until next time, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tell.